And as you see, let's take our Bibles tonight and turn to the book of Acts. We'll get right to it tonight. Acts chapter number 23. And this morning in Sunday school, as we were in Acts chapter 22, we walked through just the events that have led up to where we are right now. Paul has come to Jerusalem for Pentecost, and all the Jewish nation is there. And he goes into the temple and is accused of teaching the Jews not to follow the law, and accused of bringing a Gentile, a Greek, into the temple. And of course, these things weren't true. But these accusations were so serious and so personal that things got really violent really fast, and they desired to kill him, and the Roman authorities had to intervene, and Paul's about to be examined, and we talked about how that word tortured, interrogated, and they were going to scourge him and beat him with a cat of nine tails to find out, hey, tell us what's going on, what's the problem here? And they find out that he is a Roman citizen, and so everything has been kind of put on hold. And the captain of the guard has said, okay, well, we're not going to touch him. We need to get this sorted out because I'm not about to punish somebody who has been accused without trial, especially as a Roman citizen. They had those rights. And so the captain of the guard, the captain of the centurions there, has commanded Paul to be unbound, and he's basically under house arrest, and he has called for the council and for the elders of the nation of Israel to come so that they can sort out what it is that Paul is being accused of. Why are so many people trying to literally tear him apart? And that's where we come in Acts chapter 23. Verse 30 of the previous chapter says this, and on the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. And so Paul is standing before this council. Now this council would have been, some people believe it would have been easily over 100 different individuals that would have been there, maybe in the several hundreds that would have gathered together. This would have been all of the religious leaders, all the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of them coming together to examine Paul. Verse 1 in chapter 23, and Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. So picture this. Paul's already beaten up. He's already bruised. He's already bloodied from the violence that happened before. And now Paul stands up, and the first thing he says, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest sends somebody over to strike him in the mouth. Now, why would the high priest send somebody, tell someone who stands by him, strike him, smite him in the mouth? Any ideas as to why Ananias would command that this be done? Jacob. Watch your tongue. Watch your tone when you talk to me, boy. No, that's not necessarily the reason. Within Jewish custom, if someone spoke something falsely, especially in this type of a scenario, there would have been that order to, okay, when they smite him, it's a public statement saying what you're saying is not true. What you're saying is not true. So the high priest commands them to smite him, and this is what Paul says. Verse number 3. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. Woo! That's some strong language. Now, why is it significant that Paul calls him a whited wall? They're full of dead men's bones. So if you were to go over to Jerusalem today, and you were to look at their graveyards and things, they would have whited sepulchres. So the outsides would be pristine and white, but Christ, remember, to Brother Francisco's point, He says, your whited sepulchres full of dead men's bones. You clean the outside of the cup, but the inside's full of excess and extortions. And interesting that Paul uses the exact same phrase to respond to what Ananias just said. He says, God's going to smite you, you whited wall. You know what Paul's saying here? He says, you look good on the outside, but you're full of death. There's no life. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? So while this might have been custom, it certainly was not the way that things should have been handled when it came to the accusations that were being thrown against him and the audience in which he was standing. Verse 4, and they that stood by said, revilest thou God's high priest? Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. You know what Paul is doing here before he even gets to his defense? He has made a statement that he has lived in good conscience towards God. Now that's according to the law. These people are accusing him of teaching people to not follow the law and of breaking the law by bringing a Gentile, by bringing a Greek into the temple. You know what Paul is doing right here? He is continuing to restate the law. When Ananias has someone smite him, he says, God's going to smite you, you whited wall. Why are you having someone strike me contrary to the law? He's letting everybody know that he knows the law. And when someone tells him, why are you reviling God's anointed? And he says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I didn't know that because the Bible says you're not to speak evil of the ruler of your people. You know what he's doing? He's quoting the law. Now, question. Go back a little bit in your mind toward Paul before he was Paul. What was his name before? Saul. And was he a friend of the church or an enemy of the church? An enemy. And when he was an enemy of the church, when he was sent to Damascus, who gave him the letters of authority? The high priest. Now, is it possible that we have a different high priest now than what we did then? Yes, absolutely. But the point is this. Do you think Paul wouldn't have recognized who he was and known who he was? I mean, they called the council together. He may not have been wearing his robes of authority, his priestly robes for temple duty, but every Jew knows who the high priest is. So it's possible that Paul didn't know who he was because he hasn't been there for a while. Been several years since he's been in Jerusalem. But chances are that Paul's discernment, he knows who this guy is. Because we're going to see in just a couple of verses his perception and discernment within the situation. Look at this. Verse number 6. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, of the hope and resurrection of the dead. I am called in question. Now, Paul just takes a can of worms and just blows it wide open. Because he not only does he know what's going on, but he's a Pharisee. And we're going to see here, why is this such a big deal? Look at verse number 7. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess or believe both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Their tune has changed all of a sudden. They've gone from wanting to kill this guy. As soon as Paul says, I'm a Pharisee and I'm being brought in question about the resurrection, right? Because there's all these accusations going around. There's not a very clear answer, a clear understanding of why it is that everyone wants to kill this guy. And when he's brought before the council there to sort out what the issue is, he says, it's because of the hope of the resurrection. Now, question, was that why Paul had been beaten and almost killed just the day before? Was that the reason? No, it was not. So did Paul lie here? Andrew says, yes, Paul's a liar. Just committing. I love it. I love it. Paul is not lying here because isn't the resurrection the entire crux of our faith? It's the entire foundational point, right? And it's the resurrection of who? Christ. Now, are there other issues? Are there other problems that these people have with the account of the gospel? Let alone the resurrection, just dealing with Jesus Christ as God, that he was their Messiah. Like, they've rejected that. He doesn't bring that up. You know what he brings up? He brings up the resurrection. Because Paul perceives, he says, wait a minute, there's some people here who are Pharisees, and there's some people here who are Sadducees. And so he says, guys, one of the reasons I'm standing here is because I'm being brought into question about my belief in the resurrection. Now, that is a true statement, but it is a carefully crafted true statement. Not just resurrection in general, the resurrection of one specific individual. Remember, we were talking about Paul's discernment when dealing with people, how in Athens he speaks to about the unknown God on Mars Hill and brings it back to creation and brings it back to the gospel. Now, standing before these religious leaders, he brings the focal point not on the unknown God, but he tailors it to the audience, and he says, I'm being brought into question of the resurrection. Well, the Pharisees, I believe in the resurrection. Then let me tell you about someone who I know rose from the dead because I met him face to face on the road to Damascus. See how Paul's going to be directing the conversation back towards the gospel? Was the resurrection the direct issue with which he was involved and why he was being brought into question? No. But was the resurrection and the story of the resurrection of Christ specifically part of the issue that was being dealt with here? Absolutely yes. Carefully crafted truth. Not untrue, but intentionally crafted in such a way to further the conversation. Because if he hadn't brought up the resurrection, you know what would have happened here? The Pharisees and the Sadducees would have agreed and said, away with him, kill him, we're done. But once he brings up the resurrection, now there's division. The Pharisees, all of a sudden, like, hey, we got to hear this guy out. We can't go against God. And so Paul might have an opportunity here to talk to these men, at least some of them, about the gospel. But look what happens here. Verse 9, and there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down to take him by force from among them and to bring him into the castle. So we go all the way back to the tension that we had before, only this time it's within the council. And the chief captain finally intervenes because he is literally afraid that they are going to tear Paul in pieces. I have this picture in my mind, Jacob, of Paul kind of standing in the center of the council chamber, and there's Pharisees on one side and there's Sadducees on the other side, and they're struggling for Paul. They're trying to, this back and forth, this tug of war with a live person is what's going on. And there's this fight, and the chief priest said, this is going to get, the chief captain says, this is going to get ridiculous, and he goes in, he grabs them, takes them back into the castle. Now, imagine the fallout after this happens. See, the focus is on Paul, right? It's his story. But the chief, the captain of the guard takes him away, takes him back to the castle, and the council leaves. And before, when the council came together, were they divided or unified in their perspective of Paul? They were unified. Now that they leave the chambers, are they unified or divided? They're divided. And so there are some of the Pharisees who are beginning to doubt the validity of some of these charges. Their mind and their heart might be a little bit more open to the message of the gospel now. And imagine the effect on the people, because this almost every single male Jew in the nation of Israel was there for this festival, for this day of worship. I mean, the temple had been closed the day before, doors shut because this happened. You think that people aren't interested in what the result of the council was? And you have part of them who are Pharisees who say, this guy's been unjustly accused. We need to hear him out. He's got a message from God. You got another part that says, same message, just different verse. Paul needs to be killed. He's broken the law. We shouldn't follow him. We shouldn't give ear to what he has to say. Because of one statement. It's because of the resurrection that I brought into question. You see the wisdom and discernment of Paul in this situation? And by the way, it goes to show how a single statement can have a lasting impact. The way that we use our words and the way that we represent Christ absolutely matters. And Paul has no idea the conversations that are going on in homes and in the streets and in the public square and in the markets about what just happened. He has no way of really knowing all that's going on. But this, no doubt, stirred up some conversation. And it's never a bad thing when people are talking about Christ. Oh yeah, there'll be some who reject and some who outright deny him, but there are going to be others who might have some questions. Others who might have their curiosity piqued a little bit. And so bring him into the castle, and look what happens here. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. God comes into the midst of this crazy, chaotic situation and gives Paul some comfort. He says, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. God says, Paul, this isn't the end of the journey for you. You're going to go to Rome and witness for me there. Imagine the comfort that would have been, because Paul's still human. We look at the Apostle Paul and think, wow, it's the Apostle Paul. But this guy just got almost killed twice in just as many days. He's been beaten. He's been bruised. He's been battered. Almost killed. They wanted to kill him. He almost got scourged by the Romans. He's under house arrest right now. They almost tore him to pieces again in the council. I mean, no matter how strong you are, that's bound to have an effect on you. Because like I said, as far as we know, Paul's alone in these situations. But the Lord comes to him and says, Paul, as you've testified for me in Jerusalem, you will also stand for me in Rome. And when it was day, verse number 12, certain of the Jews banded together. Brother Francisco, can I have your handheld? It might be better here. Keep hearing it popping. I'm going to switch the hand up here. All right, there we go. Verse number 12. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. That's pretty serious. I mean, how much do you have to hate somebody to say, I'm not going to eat anything, I'm not going to drink anything until Eli is dead? Now, day one, if you're not successful, no big deal, right? There's tomorrow. But then day 2 and then day 3, the longer you go, the more desperate and more extreme measures you're willing to take because, hey, you don't want to die. They're basically saying, it's either me or Paul. Because I'm not eating or drinking until this guy is dead. That is how much hate they had in their heart for this man who was trying to preach the gospel. Look at verse number 13. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. More than 40 people made this covenant together. The word used there is conspiracy. You want to talk about some drama? Someone needs to take the book of Acts and make a series out of that. The life of Paul. It'd be full of intrigue and guile and deception, a lot of cloak and dagger. There's 40 guys who have agreed together, we're not going to eat or drink until the Apostle Paul's dead. And it goes further. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now, therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, and we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. So this group of 40 men, they go to the chief priests and the council. You know what this tells me? I mean, you don't include someone into your conspiracy unless you're certain that that person's on your side. Like, you're not taking the chance. So with these guys going to the chief priest, you know what this tells me? They were sympathetic to their cause, and they knew it. And so now it's not just these 40 guys. Now it's the religious and political leaders of Jerusalem who are in on this plan. They came to the priests and elders and basically said, hey, guys, you need to reach out to the captain and ask for Paul to be brought out tomorrow to the council so that you can question him in a bit more detail, get some more clarity on some of these things. And when they bring him out, we are going to kill him. This is scary stuff. 40 men, over 40 men, who have committed themselves to this action. But look what happens here. Verse 16. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Verse number 17, then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is it that thou hast to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, see thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. So these 40 men, or more than 40 men, in league with the chief priests and the elders, they are trying to kill Paul. And you know what God uses to undo their intricate conspiracy and plan? Paul's sister's son. That would make him his what? Nephew. A boy. Maybe Titus's age. Or maybe Caesar's age. Just a boy. Somehow he hears this plan, and you know what he does? He goes to the castle and he tells Paul. And Paul says, you need to tell the chief captain. He calls the guard, guard, guard. And you imagine the fear in this boy's heart. They're trying to kill my uncle. Imagine the fear as he hears these grown adults talking this way. We're not going to eat or drink anything until that man is dead. And that man happens to be his uncle. It was a brave thing that this young man did. He took some risk. He goes, he tells Paul. Paul calls the guard, says, guard, you need to take this boy to the captain immediately. He has something to tell him. And so the guard takes the boy to the captain. And the captain takes him aside privately and says, what do you have to tell me? Tell me what's going on. And he unfolds the plan for him. And look at how God intervenes. Verse number 23, and he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70. How many is that? 70. So 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night. So this is almost 500 men that this captain is calling up for one purpose and one purpose only, to conduct Paul to safety. What a change of circumstances for Paul, huh? Let's keep reading here and see what happens. And provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter after this manner: Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then I came with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. Now, is that true? Is that exactly how events played out with this guy? No. He hears the tumult. He hears the uproar. He goes, what's going on? He brings men down, and he's about to beat Paul. He binds him. Doesn't bring up the fact that he put him in chains. Doesn't bring up the fact, he's like, yeah, I almost beat this guy. But, he says, you know what he's trying to do? He's trying to make himself look good to the governor. This just goes to show how God can use unregenerate, unsaved men who are selfishly focused to accomplish his purpose. Because as the captain of the guard, discovering this conspiracy and revealing it to the governor, well, those are some good points in his book. So he is writing this letter to put himself in the best position possible, to present himself in the best light possible. Verse 28, and when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. But didn't he put him in bonds already? And so, right out of the gate, first impressions are important, right? Now, Paul's still beat up and bruised and beaten. He's not, and naturally already, his physical presence is not something that's his strength. It's a weakness. Remember how they say that his letters are strong, but his physical presence is weak? So Paul already doesn't have a whole lot going for him when it comes to first impressions. Can you imagine the governor, Felix, being presented with this broken, bloodied, really haggard-looking Paul? What would your first impression be when you saw a guy like that? But with this letter changes the importance and the perspective that Paul would have been seen in with the governor. The centurion tells him right out of the gate, this man's a Roman citizen, and he's done nothing according to our laws worthy of death. That's a good start. That's a good start. Let's keep reading. Verse number 30, and when it was told me that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. He basically says, and now Paul's your problem. Bye. He just passes him off to Felix, sends him, and this is what happens. And the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. And on the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was, and he understood that he was of Cilicia. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. You know the question that immediately pops into my mind as I read this, Brother Francisco? What happens to that group of conspirators? Do they actually keep their oath and die? Because there's no way they're touching him now. What happened to that's what I want to know. That's one of those questions I want to answer when I get to heaven. What happened to those 40 guys? Like, did they just say, well, we tried? Day 7, day 8. The Bible doesn't really speak to that because the focus is on Paul. But you see the ripple effect that the gospel has, both for good and bad. Not bad because the gospel has bad effect, but bad because of people's response to it. He says, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. Now, this next Sunday morning, we'll get into what Paul says and what he does before Felix the governor. But you see what's happening here? As Paul is being faithful in his witness, God is placing him in situations that require even more boldness. Because he's going to stand before Felix the governor. and he's going to give his testimony yet again. And if you want to read ahead, Felix is going to send him on to where God told him that he was ultimately going to go, all the way to Rome. We read stories like this, and sometimes we think, man, Paul was such an amazing Christian. Look at all the opportunities that he had to share the gospel. But I want to tell you this, Victory Baptist Church, many of us would think it would be really neat. Man, wouldn't it be cool if, pick your favorite political leader, if someone was able to witness to them? You know, if Joe Biden would trust Jesus Christ, or Donald Trump, if he's truly saved, I don't know. But if he would trust Christ, and, you know, we would look at those opportunities like, wow, what an opportunity. You know, if you had the opportunity to witness to Governor Newsom, what an opportunity. But I'll tell you this, you know why Paul was given the opportunity to witness to Governor Felix? Because he was faithful in the other opportunities that God gave him. God's not going to give us more opportunity to be witness for him when we're not faithful in the opportunities that he gives us now. And I know this, that as a believer, God wants to give us opportunities to witness to others. And so the question is are you faithful in the opportunities that God gives you each week to witness to others, whether it be coworkers, family, neighbors, your Uber driver, your Amazon delivery guy? He's been showing up a lot this holiday season, right? The point that I'm making is this, and that in our life, we can all say, and we can all have the attitude that, man, I just don't have the opportunity, Pastor. Well, maybe it's because you're not looking. You know what God wants us to do? He wants us to look. Because you know what Paul did in every situation? You know why he had the discernment that he had? I believe it's because Paul was looking, okay, how can I leverage the gospel here? How can I get the conversation towards the gospel? In every situation, in his interaction with the chief captain speaking to him in Greek, he's trying to figure out a way, okay, how can I get to the gospel? How can I bring my witness to bear? As he speaks to the people on the steps of the castle in Hebrew, what can I do? How can I bring, gives his testimony. As he stands before Felix, he's going to have the same attitude. When he stands before the Pharisees and the council and the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees, he mentions the resurrection. Why? Because it gives him opportunity to come back to the gospel. One of the reasons Paul's able to have such discernment is because he was laser focused in his purpose. You know what can skew our discernment at times and make it difficult for us to make the right decision? When our desires conflict with God's directives. You see, if we're not laser focused on walking with the Lord, then it becomes increasingly difficult to navigate the circumstances and situations of our life. But when we are laser focused and when we are intentional, those matters of discernment, understanding how to deal in different situations, when my entire life is built around how can I share the gospel? How can I preach the gospel? How can I get to the gospel? When that's our focus, it helps us make the right decisions so that we can come to the gospel. And the Apostle Paul here, in all of these different situations, showed amazing discernment. And yet in all of it, the focus isn't on Paul. You know who the focus should be on? It should be on his God. Because in all of it, God guided and directed and had the entire situation in his control. These 40 men who wanted to kill him, these people that rushed upon him and would have torn him to pieces, these people who brutally beat him and wanted to kill him, in every situation, you know what God did? God delivered him. But did Paul still get beat up? Yes or no? Yes, he did. But did God deliver him? Yes. You know, sometimes when it comes to our understanding of God's deliverance, we want that to happen without any type of injury. We think that God's deliverance means that we don't go through any hardship sometimes. Oh, God, please deliver me, to help me in this situation. You know what we're really saying? God, I don't want to hurt. But God's deliverance sometimes, I'm thankful for the times where he does avoid the hurt. But sometimes God's deliverance isn't to avoid the hurt, it's to go through it. But in every situation, at exactly the right moment, and isn't this interesting? Almost sometimes at the last possible moment, God intervenes. I mean, Paul's literally being beaten, and I mean, just put yourself in Paul's shoes. I think most of us would have thought, this is it. I'm going to heaven. I'm dead. These people are beating me to death. I'm dead. I'm going to see Jesus. And I wonder if, like, right at the moment he lost consciousness, those Roman centurions show up. And then he stands before the council, and they're about to tear him to pieces, and the captain intervenes again. And these 40 men, the conspiracy that happens, and God intervenes again. Time and time again, we see the enemy try to prevent and to stop the message of the Apostle Paul, but time and again, we see God come in at exactly the right moment, at exactly the right time, and in sometimes the most unlikely way. Paul's sister's son. We don't even know his name, but he saved Paul's life that day. God used him that way. God's in control. And just like God was in control in this story, God's in control in your story. I don't know what it is that you face, what it is that you deal with, but God is in control. And you know what he's going to give you tomorrow if you ask him? Opportunity. Are we looking for opportunity to tell the people about the gospel? Is that our passion? Is that our focus? Is that the reason for which we live? Because it was for Paul. And you see that in the way that he navigated these different situations. In his conversations and his decisions, he always tried to make decisions that would lead to more discussion and more exposure of the gospel. And that's what we need to do in our life. And this next week, we're going to see how Paul stands before Felix and the council yet again, and how God works in this situation. But as we close tonight, may I encourage you with this? In a culture that is very hostile to the gospel and very hostile to Jesus Christ, there are those who are seeking. You and I need to look for the opportunities. So the question this week, tonight, for this week is this. Are you going to ask God to give you opportunities? And when he gives you those opportunities, are you going to use them for his honor and glory? Because I promise you this, that God's not going to trust you with those big faith moments if you're not faithful in the small ones. There's a reason that Paul ends up standing before the emperor of Rome. It's not because he was awesome. It's not because he was charismatic and motivational. You look at him and he's really nothing really to be impressed with. God gave him the opportunity not because of his skill, but because of his commitment to follow the Lord. And that is a commitment that we can all have. Amen? Let's pray together.